Hello, and welcome to our presentation on Latin America's infrastructure outlook for 2021. My name is Sebastián Pérez Ferreiro, and I'm the Senior Managing Editor of BNamericas. I will begin the presentation with the main points of our just published report, Infrastructure Outlook 2021, Where the Opportunities Are, which you'll find on the BNamericas platform. I will then discuss the Latin American sector's challenges and opportunities with three of our analysts based in Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. Let's start with perhaps the biggest takeaway of our report, which is that investment in infrastructure, especially in public-private partnership projects, is expected to drive Latin America's economic recovery in 2021. The PPP model is well established in the region and will be tapped by governments facing fiscal restraints after a year in which they've been forced to ramp up social programs and subsidies and provide tax breaks to offset the full or partial lockdowns of their economies in order to fend off the pandemic. In BNamericas' 2020 survey on the infrastructure sector, the vast majority of respondents, 86.6%, indicated that PPPs would play a greater role in the sector. 80% also believed that PPPs would continue to be valid despite the pandemic's impact on their financial performance. In fact, next year we should see a lot of competing PPP projects from Latin American countries, all vying for investor dollars. One issue we found is whether the region's governments have the capacity to handle these programs, from the tendering and awarding process to the legal oversight. We're talking specifically about a lack of resources or qualified professionals, of the need to implement rapid systems and processes. Capacity to implement national infrastructure plans varies from country to country, but it can also be subcontracted as multilateral entities pitch in with technical know-how and funding. In terms of financing, investors have liquidity and risk appetite, and interest rates are still favorable. But as the head of the Infrastructure and Energy Division at IDB Invest told us, there is no lack of financing, there's a lack of good projects, a phrase that comes up again and again in Latin America. In the BNamericas survey, just over 45% of respondents said financing conditions would be worse in the next 12 months, including the first 3 quarters of 2021. Just over 39% believe conditions would be better. The survey also highlights the importance that respondents give to the role of multilateral banking, with almost half of those surveyed considering it the best financing option, followed by the issuance of bonds in the international market, and with fewer responses, participation from pension funds in projects. Brazil is shaping up to be the most dynamic and interesting market, with an ambitious ports privatization plan and projects in the highway and railway segments. There's also a marked improvement in the perception of the business climate there. Overall, there are plenty of engineering and construction firms ready to tackle the expected wave of projects. And as we await the widespread distribution of COVID-19 vaccines, health protocols are in place to allow builders to carry out works during the pandemic. One under-the-radar concern is about competition from Chinese companies with access to cheaper financing from their home country. The most attractive Latin America infrastructure sectors are interurban highways, social infrastructure, especially hospitals, and ports. For instance, the first wave of 5G projects being launched in Colombia includes $2.6 billion for highway projects, which is more than half of the total $5 billion investments in the program. Furthermore, Latin America and the Caribbean have a large deficit of health infrastructure, which has been evident during the pandemic. And investment required in the sector is about $100 billion. In contrast, airport projects will remain in wait-and-see mode for obvious reasons, as will urban toll roads. Meanwhile, the railway will continue to fail to meet its potential in the region, with the notable exception of Mexico and Brazil. I'm joined now by our infrastructure analyst and author of our 2021 Infrastructure Outlook report, Raul Ferro, our Brazil Bureau Chief, Rogerio Gelmayer, who is closely following the government's concession agenda, and our Mexico-based infrastructure reporter, Ariel Rodriguez. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Raul, let's start with you, because one of the main points you make in our just published 2021 sector outlook is whether the government ministries and agencies in Latin America are equipped to handle the ambitious infrastructure plans that were unveiled during the second half of the year. Tell us about the concerns here.
Well, there is a big concern about that because the in spite of all these years of experience developing public, private-public associations, um, the institutional landscape has been, in some cases, very slow to process all the projects. And in the last few years, also because of the corruption situations, especially regarding the Odebrecht, um, you have much more control from watchdogs like Contralorias or these kind of offices. So all the process has become much more complex. On the other side, you have an increase in the number, in the volume and value of the projects, as well as in the technical requirements of the projects. And that demands much more human capacity to process that. That's the main reason for the concerns. However, people like the IDB Invest or the IFC said that they can help the authorities in these countries to improve the process and go ahead with their plans um, to develop new infrastructure to reactivate the
One of the
economy.
things we've seen in the pandemic is that some infrastructure assets, like airports, bore the brunt of the lockdowns, hurting the bottom line of concessionaires. In the case of Brazil, Rogerio, can you tell us which segments require caution and which ones are positioned to absorb investments and thrive in the coming year?
The areas here in Brazil, the areas with more positive forecasts for the next year, just in terms of the auctions and also in terms of new projects, are the segments of the roads, ports, highways, and the sanitation. Talking about the road segment, although with certain impacts caused by the pandemic, mainly during the second quarter of this year, with a reduction of the traffic, mainly from passengers vehicles, the sector is already showing recovery. In the sanitation area in Brazil, there is a huge pipeline of projects, and this is already attracting the interest from the private sector, especially after a recent change in the regulations, which paves the way for more investment from companies and investors in the segments, which is still rightly dominated by state-run players. Also, for the next year, certain concessions are expected to take place in the sanitation area, and the attention will be for the sanitation service in part of Rio de Janeiro state. Talking about now about the ports and the railroad segments, those areas are showing the major resilience even during the pandemic, because both sectors are strongly linked with mining and agricultural activity in Brazil. And those two segments remain solid, and the international investors, mainly from China, are showing a strong appetite for those projects. And to talk about the negative scenario, the airport sector is the most affected sector, and the government is insisted to advance in a pipeline of concessions with the airports.
Thanks, Rogerio. Let's head north to Mexico now, where the Lopez Obrador administration announced a very ambitious national infrastructure plan. Ariel, you've been tracking the plan and its details. What can you tell us about its projects and what's different about this plan, given how the Mexican government seems to announce one of these every year?
Hi, Sebas. Of course, like you said, we've been tracking this program, and it's very timely now that you ask that, because the government just presented the second package of infrastructure projects. This projects total about $12 billion, and it's about 68 of them. Most of them are highway projects, of course, but there are also opportunities for energy sector, for a little of ports, a little of water, but mainly highway projects. Now, we expect, or the government wants to present a third part or a fourth part of this program in the upcoming year. That will mean a lot more projects for the private sector to grab some, given that the government, this program, sorry, particularly is being financed by the private sector by at least 50%. That means that each project must receive at least 50% of its investment. Now it could go, it could be a public-private partnership, or it could be a fully private sector finance project. Now you're right, the government announced a previous program last year, and it had 48 projects, and all of a sudden that project is no longer active. That program is gone. What happened is that the coronavirus pandemic caused some delays in construction, and also had to be rethought because some investors withdrew their proposals. So this new infrastructure program should be the country's agenda for the upcoming years, at least until AMLO leaves the office.
Thanks, Ariel. Raul, back to you. Which countries in the region can expect to see significant infrastructure investment growth in 2021?
Well, I think that Chile and Colombia are the better prepared countries in this in South America, except in Brazil, to attract companies and investors to develop these plans. Mainly because they have good business environment, and also because they has been improving all the framework to develop these projects. And also because the private sector has been very close to the government on improve the rules to go ahead with projects. In the case of Chile, for instance, the Cámara Chilena de la Construcción, the construction chamber, is suggesting to organize a kind of emergency reconstruction agency, very similar to the one that the Chile organizes after earthquakes. That will give much more flexibility to the government to approve and go ahead with the projects. Peru is in a special case because it has a good business environment, or a macroeconomic environment, but because of the corruption scandal by Odebrecht, the sector is quite paralyzed. Most of the big companies there has been involved in this. The government has set up, the authorities has set up very rigorous controls that in some cases are paralyzing the projects. So I think that Peru has a lost opportunity now. They are betting on going on government-to-government schemes, also for big projects like the expansion of the metro system.
Thanks, Raul. Rogerio, what will be the priorities of the Bolsonaro administration's concession agenda in the upcoming year?
The Brazilian government right now is prioritizing especially three infrastructure projects for the next year. Those projects are priorities of the government because the huge amount of investment involved in those projects. The first one is the Dutra Highway, the highway that connects São Paulo and the Rio de Janeiro cities. And also the government is prioritizing the Ferrogrão highways, and also the concession program of 22 airports, which is the so-called the sixth round of airports concession. All those three concessions are planned for the next year, and involves an amount of investments of more than $4 billion for the next year. And the most risk scenario is about the sixth round of the airports, as it involves 22 airports, and the plan is to work over that via 3 blocks, combining more profitable airports with less profitable airports. Under the new conditions, the local airport authority in Brazil reduced the minimum fee of those airports in order to attract the interest from investors.
Ariel, when it comes to projects and even mega projects like the Dos Bocas refinery, the Lopez Obrador administration has a go-it-alone attitude. Will it make enough room for the private sector as it embarks on its national infra plan?
Probably, most likely, yes. So the infrastructure projects that you just mentioned are those that the government and the private sector are putting together in this national infrastructure program, which again has 60 projects confirmed so far with investments of up to 525 billion pesos or $26 billion. Now, the mega projects, on the other hand, are AMLO's signature agenda, infrastructure agenda. These projects, mega projects, are being financed solely by public funds. And we're talking about, besides Dos Bocas, we're talking about the $7.5 billion Maya train, the US $1 billion the Tehuantepec rail corridor, which is an interoceanic corridor that will cross Mexico's narrowest region and mimic the Panama Canal. And we also have his US 3.4 billion Felipe Angeles International Airport that he decided to construct instead of the mega project that he canceled when he came into office. So those projects will continue. They will not stop. He already included funds or resources for those projects in his 2021 spending budget. And it seems that they will carry out these projects along with the private sector projects that have been packed under the country's national infrastructure program.
Thanks, Ariel. Raul, what is the outlook for financing infrastructure projects in Latin America?
Well, in general, you have a lot of liquidity in the markets, and because the interest rates are so low, that there are some risk appetite by investors. At least that is what people on the IDB and the World Bank thinks about this. On the other hand, for some countries like Chile, Peru, and Colombia, they had very good credit ratings in spite of some deterioration in the last few months because of the pandemic. But they are in very good shape to attract financing. However, most of this financing will come from the private sector, or it must come from the private sector, excepting for some big projects, for instance, like the expansion of the metro system in Santiago that is built by the government and state-owned company, Metro S.A., but they have access to the capital markets and has a very good rating. So the financial side seems very, very promising, at least for the next year. So that would not be a problem for countries, as I said, like Chile, Peru, or Colombia. Different stories for countries like Argentina, for instance, or at some point Bolivia. But I think the financial landscape seems positive for this effort.
Okay. Rogerio, as a final question for you, what are the main risks you see for Brazil's infrastructure sector in 2021?
After a recession of a projected recession of 4.5% this year, the Brazilian economy is expected to expand 3.5% in the next year. The risk for this economic scenario and also for the infrastructure agenda came from the fiscal side. This year, in order to face the pandemic, the Brazilian government adopted a series of social programs to contain the effects of the pandemic. But the government debt soared under this scenario to something like near 100% of the country GDP. With this situation, the inflation is showing signs of pressure, and there is a risk for the continuation of the Selic benchmark interest rate to remain low at low levels for the next few years. And then, with an increase in the interest rate, there is a possibility of a contamination of investor sentiment, including the sentiment of investor for infrastructure projects.
Okay, great. Ariel, what type of projects will be a priority in Mexico and which ones will get left behind?
Right. So, from the looks of it, we believe that the projects that are getting the most attention are railway projects, train projects. Here's what we know. We here in Business News Americas have identified 18 train projects under the administration of Andres Manuel. 14 of those projects have been confirmed and are either under construction, awaiting construction, or under planning. There are other 4 train projects that haven't been confirmed, but there are still possibilities that the administration decides to move on with them. Now, why are we so excited with these train projects? Just to put it in perspective, the previous administration of former President Enrique Peña Nieto did not complete a single train project. So all of a sudden, from one administration to another, AMLO has pledged to complete 2,000 kilometers of new trains by the end of his term, which means it's this portfolio of train projects. So it's a really interesting proposal and has a lot of giant infrastructure giants, international ones, coming to Mexico to see if this is going to happen or not. And some bidding processes have already started, and it's going to be an interesting 4 years, I believe. Now, what projects have been left behind? There's a lot of uncertainty right now regarding port projects. As many of you know, the president decided to give away the control of all ports to the defense forces, the army, which is called SEMAR, the Navy. And that has the private sector a little bit scared. No, very little to none port projects have been confirmed, and experts told us that that has to do with this change in administration and this decision to allow the army to control the ports.
Okay, thank you. Raul, one of the points you made in your Outlook report was the concern about competition from Chinese engineering and construction companies. Can you tell us more about that and what the Latin American sector is doing to address it?
Well, the main concern is about potential financial dumping by Chinese companies. Chinese companies has been very active in the region. Well, they won the concession for the Bogota subway systems, for instance, and it has been very active also in countries like Panama or Brazil, as we know, and also Peru. There are some concerns, mainly about some kind of unfair competition because of the financial support that they could get from the Chinese government. But it seems that the Chinese companies are more and more adapted to the local conditions. That was a big issue, especially in Chile, where the processes are high competitive. No, but they spent the first years here in Chile on the infrastructure sector trying to understand how they can go into the market, and now they are going with market conditions, but the industry is still worried about this unfair potential financial support from the Chinese government.
Raul, Rogerio, Ariel, thank you very much for participating in our presentation. If you're seeing the recording of the presentation on YouTube, you can click on the link in the description to receive an executive summary of our Infrastructure Outlook 2021 Intelligence Series report. We also invite you to visit BNamericas.com to find out more about our content. Thank you and have a great day.